Baby, baby,
Yeah, I love to call you
baby.
I wanted to start with my score of 7 out of 10 to show that this isn't such a bad game. I actually had a lot of fun with it. But it doesn't come without its flaws. I think I can pinpoint where people may have had problems with it. When I see people saying, you're better off not playing it, I think that's kind of unearned, because it's not as bad as people say. Fanbase is a bit whack though. Let's start with story. I know this is sometimes considered a prequel of sorts. You need to know Super Metroid in order to get it. It actually takes place afterwards, but then has Samus lamenting on her past in the cutscenes. This has a lot of previous material, but one trope that I didn't really see were the space pirates. I was actually kind of relieved about that, because they're considered extinct after Super. And I feel like maybe they should remain that way. It also doesn't pay homage to the Chozo in much way at all. In some ways, I do believe this should have been a prequel to all the games, and then maybe I wouldn't hold so much problem with it. Other than the little differences, it plays out like an Americanized version. It has the formula of a Hollywood sci-fi movie. I also felt it necessary to urge you to stick around until the end of the credits, because that ending beforehand is barely even an ending. It kind of left a bad enough taste in my mouth to sour the whole game, but there is another boss. There is another ending, so just be patient. All in all, the story ends up kind of plain and average, so a 5 out of 10. But let's move on to the bread and butter, the gameplay. It's quite unexpected the way it plays, because you don't use the nunchuck. You hold the Wii remote sideways. Now, this actually came across pretty good in translation, but there are times where you just have to put the Wii remote upright and do certain things. But there are separate low pressure sections where you don't have to be quick about it, so you don't have to flip-flop all the time. The one exception I see are the missiles, which it could be annoying to switch just for that, but I didn't find it all that bad. Speaking of combat, it's quite different. Shooting auto-locks enemies, so obviously that comes with a few misfires here and there, but it still has a lot that the series is known for. You can dodge attacks similar to the parry system in SR and Dread. You have finishing melee moves that have these crisp and unique animations. The wall kick is back, and I can actually do it this time. So, believe it or not, I think there are some things that originated here that carried over into the later games because they were so good. Now, beating enemies doesn't give you health like usual, but save points do, so it's a bit of a trade-off. You do slowly gain your items back, but not for the reasons you might imagine. You see, because you're in with the Federation now, you need to follow orders.
You don't move unless I say so, and you don't fire until I say so.
Which means that you have your weapons, but they're not authorized to be used by your officer yet. Sometimes it's kind of dumb though, because you have this whole section of extreme heat to get through for the commanders like, oh yeah, you can activate your various suit, I'll allow it. It's a defense, I don't see why that wouldn't be allowed. Since there's no collecting random bits from enemies, you could just reload your missiles anytime. Expansions are just for as much as you can hold, which is really cool. The art is pretty good too, seeing Samus clash against these white matte backgrounds in contrast to bright colors of her armor to the dark environments. All the little pieces glow. Sometimes it's lush, the plasma beam is really satisfying with its green lightning approach. It pushes the Wii to its limit. I had times where it seemed like it couldn't keep up and pop a loading banner at the bottom. That was really only when I was moving faster than I wanted, so it wasn't detrimental to the experience at all. In fact, I was kind of proud of it. It might not mean anything for today's standards, but at least it looks pretty good today, especially for being a little over 12 years old already. Something I didn't really like were the investigate sections, where it forces you into a first-person POV. You have to spot what it is you're supposed to be looking at. Thing is, there's no real clue most of the time. Even the very first one is this little red emblem on a spaceship that shows the Federation logo. I never would have guessed that unless I looked it up. In fact, that was where most of my difficulty came from, just figuring out what to do rather than where to do it. Stark contrast to Super Metroid with the doors in your way that you just can't get through. Some people will like that, some people won't. Backtracking is interesting because it's not traditional. In Prime 2 they had those main sections and then a hub connecting them all. This kinda has that with the sectors. A lot of the time you're not expected to go through the same corridors to get back through though. There's usually a new route that just circles around. You can't just wander around at any given time. You're normally closed off to that one sector until you finish it. You do revisit sectors, but I never felt like I got a chance to collect everything until after the game. I didn't really even feel like I needed to because I had quite enough already to thrive. So what happens if you do collect everything in? Secret ending? No, just hard mode. I think there's still an untapped gold mine for a third-person Metroid with a 3D environment. But this is a perfectly good game. It has some of the best bosses, some of the best use of its mechanics. It's polished. It doesn't really deserve as much flack as people make it out to be. In this last section, I wanted to cover personality because I feel like this game really challenges that. A little bit of spoilers in case you were worried about that. It reads like a book. Samus actually talks, which is something that Metroid hasn't actually attempted before. I think a lot of people took problem with this because the series is known for its subtlety, and to suddenly thrust it into a narrative-driven experience is going to jar people. Especially when the main just straight up tells you what she's thinking about everything.
And I was angry. I was scared. I was grateful I was so young. I was a child.
Probably going to receive some sort of backlash for even straying away in the first place. But Metroid hasn't always been the most successful franchise, and I feel like this was the right call on paper. Now, one of the problems with switching to this is the depiction of Samus. Let's start with her voice. In the Prime days, Samus was apparently voiced by Jennifer Hale. You can look up a clip of her narrating the intro and it sounds quite good, pretty much what I expect her to sound like. But also keep in mind that there's another game other than Metroid that Samus is in. That's right, Smash. Raw specifically had a voice for Samus, which came out just a few years prior. Actress? Alessia Glidewell, who also voiced...
Tell me, stranger, what's your name?
Oh.
The way they ooze out is just so repulsive. It makes me feel like I'm going to fade away.
Oh my. Hell yeah! In this game, she's voiced by Jessica Martin, however. Now, I'm not trying to throw Jessica Martin under the bus or anything, but Samus seems a little bit monotone. I looked up some of her other voice roles, and it turns out there's two. The other was Riku, and she sounded pretty decent in that. But that's beside the point. I actually blame the direction here. I checked out the Japanese voice for Ai Kobayashi, and she actually voiced Ovalo from the Cowboy Bebop movie, so I think she could pull off a pretty bad A performance if she wanted to. But she also seemed monotone in this game. It's deliberately Samus's personality, and everything the game shows matches up.
The inner monologue voice, which is detached and I've heard it described as emotionless. It was definitely, planned on sounding like that.
This bleeds into her as a whole because in the previous games she said to be this big famous bounty hunter that everybody looks up to. She doesn't take crap from anyone. But here they don't reinforce that at all.
Pierced my heart.
It almost does seem like it should be a prequel because they acknowledge that she has done stuff in the past, but they don't treat her any differently because of it.
Don't you know how to treat a lady?
In fact, I almost felt a sort of hostile vibe from the feds, like, oh, you're too good from us, you defected and you're a bounty hunter now.
You're just an outsider.
There's some cool moments, mind you, but I feel like it's matched with powerlessness. There are points where she squeals, and that just completely threw me off because she takes hits like a champ in any other game. I know we don't really get to hear a lot of her in those, but I think everyone images that female bad A, and it just seems kind of nerfed for this game. I didn't find any of the supporting characters all that compelling either. They give you very few reasons to care about them. But the ones that they do give stick out like a sore thumb because they hammer them in. Higgs is probably the only exception to this because I feel like he could have been an actual character from Samus's past. We just don't get enough of him.
I haven't seen you since that last mission.
I'm going to tag this last bit with some spoilers because this is where I won't really talk about spoilers in the game story itself. But there's a certain thing that I found that could both be helpful and harmful to how you approach this game.
Right, let's get started.
This game was developed by Team Ninja. We know this. Same people who made Ninja Gaiden that are alive. In fact, at that point, that was all they'd done. Just different iterations of the same two series. But this was not only their first outing with the Metroid franchise, but also their first outing to approach a new IP. While all developers start somewhere, some succeed with a property by either reinventing it to the fans' liking, or making a faithful adaptation as if it were their own. This happens to be a bit of the former, the reinventing part. And because of their prior experience, it would make sense to compare this game to Ninja Gaiden and its playstyle. The way the map is, the way the action shots are, the way you walk around, even some of the sounds. I haven't played Ninja Gaiden, just seen footage, so for me to feel this, someone who's played the games must really feel it. Now, is this a question of experience, of choice, or a lack in Metroid's department? Well, Nintendo reached out to them because of their work on Ninja Gaiden, and were impressed with their latest engine for it. They took 3 designers, veterans of Metroid, as well as Sakamoto as producer, who's directed a majority of Metroid as a whole. Hayashi, who was a director from Ninja, claimed he was a big fan and wanted to include as many creatures as possible. So the thought of lack of Metroid knowledge is kind of cancelled out. Sakamoto proposed a simplistic controller design similar to the NES, hence the sideways thing. The classic controller isn't compatible, so I don't really know why.
Anthony sighed as he muttered to himself.
But what's funny is that someone even asked if this game would be too similar to Ninja Gaiden before it released, to which Sakamoto responded, "While the new game will feature heavy action-based sequences, there will be the exploration-based sequences characteristic of other Metroid games," which doesn't say a whole lot as the answer, but I guess it's true. His goal was to introduce this game to new players as well as give some old fans something new. I suppose a lot of people already know Super's ending, but honestly, I don't see many people picking this game up as a new fan. I think what it boils down to is that Sakamoto wanted something new, yet classic, as well as really trying to dive in on Samus as a person.
ある意味いろいろとこう自分のことをガードしているというか、それは敵と戦う時のその走行としてのパワードスーツもあれば、
気持ちがずっとサムスと一体な。
メトロイドアザー M はですね。
This kinda reminds me of Toshihiro Nagoshi, who created Super Monkey Ball series. He really wanted to dive into AA's character when he created Super Monkey Ball 2. Nah, I'm just kidding, but for real, he left Monkey Ball so he could create a more in-depth story and really experiment. Thus, Yakuza was born. At this point, Sakamoto hadn't really worked on any story-driven games and probably wanted to express himself. So I imagine he just tried to take one of his already tried-and-true franchises and combine it. I mean, Samus kinda already does move a little like a ninja. I would assume that's part of where the hiatus come from. What do we salvage? What do we get rid of mixed with Sakamoto's ambitions? Though, I mean, Zelda had Wind Waker, and they did a 180 to release Twilight Princess. They did all that because of what the fans had to say, and that was only the span of a few years. Conclusion, probably choice. Now, was it the wrong choice? I mean, now they could say they did it. Now they could say they tried. Personally, I think Metroid should have a 3D environment third-person shooter, but maybe not as corridor-ridden in the sense that you're looking at the side rather than behind. That's more like a mainline game. I think the 3D environment thing should be kept to spin-offs. It's because they can go and do whatever they want. Mostly. There are sections of this game where you do indeed do that, but it's more for slow detective work than combat. Sakamoto wasn't really involved with the Prime Trilogy, and it could be easily written out of the story, so I imagine this was kind of a soft reboot in his eyes, nearly changing some of the canon. I think the Federation being bad guys is fine, and trying to reuse Mother Brain for their own purposes isn't really new. We saw it in Prime 3. And this does it a bit differently, but taking Metroids in Ridley too? So what exactly is the point here? How many missions is she commissioned by the Federation to wipe out the Metroids beforehand? And then they threatened to reprimand her for originally trying to bring back a specimen? She probably wasn't going to go back to the Federation, I assume, but had to because she was damaged. yet they wanted to use it to their advantage anyway. And I don't buy Adam saying that he was the head of the project. Sure, but he only researched it? He says he warned them not to actually do it. Could he? Yes. Should he? No. But he knew that and researched it anyway, then submitted that research for review. How dumb can you be?
Then again, none of this makes sense.
And I think Ridley controlling the Metroids is a new take, but doesn't Mother Brain do the same thing? Am I just confused on that? What exactly is going on here? And as far as I know, the deleter wasn't settled upon and is just being theorized to be Pierce. Which is fine, but it just takes away from the ending, especially knowing that it doesn't get expanded upon. It would have been cooler if you questioned your teammates and even Ridley only for it to be MB. But I guess that wasn't thought up. I think MB has a lot more potential because she has a human form. I think she should return and be the one that's reviving all these projects, an overarching villain. Actual connection between these projects rather than here's other M that doesn't really fit anywhere. It's just kind of there.
Crazy. Crazy how something good can come out of something bad.